Одня. Доброго дня. Доброго дня. Доброго дня. Okay. Are we ready? Okay. All right. 3, 2, 1. Dobro dnia. Welcome to Ukraine Pavilion here at COP30 in Belém, Brazil. Today we are addressing clean energy and critical minerals and Ukraine's strategic role in the energy transition. So our keynote speaker, Honorable Mеттью Джон Keen, head of the Climate Change Authority for Australia. John, welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. It is a great honor to stand in solidarity with our friends from Ukraine. And I'm joined by a number of Aussies. I should acknowledge John and Sarah Grimes that are here, and Joanna from the Power Institute, and Wei Lin also from the Climate Change Authority. It is an honor to attend this COP30 event in my capacity as chair of Australia's Climate Change Authority. I'd like to pay particular thanks to my friend Єгор, who I know has a similar role to myself at Ukraine's Ministry of Economy, Agriculture and Environment, and to my other fellow panelists who will be on a bit later on. The theme of my short speech today is mostly a reflection on Australia's energy experience since Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, a gross violation of international law and norms. In summary, we already knew ourselves off fossil fuels in order to avoid dangerous climate change. Russia's atrocious actions taught the world we also had to sever reliance on that country's energy exports and do so fast. In effect, we now have an even greater incentive and impetus to decarbonize our economies. When we do, specs for green hydrogen will brighten, and for the critical minerals needed to build such industries will do so as well. Fortunately, the alternative energy sources are not just emerging. Increasingly, they are the economic way to power our nations. Ukraine and Australia have abundant resources to meet this moment and the deep reservoirs of common goodwill to do so together. Of course, the market mayhem Australia's energy grid endured in the wake of Russia's war pales in comparison with the ongoing assault on Ukraine's energy system. The brave and unstinting defense provides a daily inspiration around the globe. And we're proud to be here today, standing shoulder to shoulder with you in solidarity, as we always will. Still, how Australia has progressed over the past 3 years may provide some useful insights for this audience. And perhaps there may be a few people back in Australia who aren't so familiar with how our power market fared at that time and has done so since. The Russian invasion, as you may recall, provoked a scramble for non-Russian energy assets. Australia benefited by getting higher export prices from our coal and gas prices without having to do much at all. However, because our national energy market sets spot wholesale power prices based on a so-called merit order, our consumers were suddenly exposed to sharply higher electricity prices as well, without much change in behavior either. To illustrate how our national electricity market works, let's say there is market demand for 10 gigawatts of power, with solar, wind, hydro, and coal bidding in at various prices, those 9 gigawatts of capacity. Suppliers of gas-fired power stations offer the final gigawatt to fill demand, and the price they get sets the price for all suppliers in that period. That's how the merit order plays out. And as gas is typically the most expensive fuel, whenever that sets the price, it's likely to be a high one. To be clear, there were other things going on in that June quarter of 2022 also. These included an unusually high, large amount of aging coal-fired power stations going offline for scheduled and unscheduled maintenance. Winter also got off to an unusually cold start in eastern parts of Australia, where about half the population live. Hence, we saw a demand jump for energy in that June. Again, a caveat for you in the Ukraine: our winters are mild by comparison to yours. My home city of Sydney has never posted a reading below 2.1 degrees Celsius at its main observatory. And that happened almost a century ago. And that's plus 2.1 degrees, I should emphasize. So what happened to our electricity market in the wake of Russia's war? Well, our East Coast gas prices rocketed almost threefold from the previous quarter, rising from about 10 Australian dollars per gigajoule, that's about $6.60 US, or 35 Brazilian real, to $28.40 per gigawatt. So a huge increase in the spot price. Export thermal coal prices absolutely soared. 10% rise versus the first quarter was far eclipsed by the leap in gas prices. The result was an unprecedented spike in the wholesale price of power, reaching a record of average Aussie $264 per megawatt hour. That's $173 US per megawatt hour, or 916 reals. The price was 3 times as much as the previous quarter's average. So thank you very much, Russia. And it was the result was doubled the previous record for wholesale prices in Australia. And to underscore the level of disruption, also endured the first prolonged never-once suspension of the market for power since its inception in 1998. That hiatus in trading lasted for 9 whole days. The state of New South Wales, where I was the energy minister at the time, which accounts for a third of the Australian economy, was at the center of that market turmoil. As the state's energy minister at that time, I can confirm that period had its stressful moments. And although these were mild compared to what some of our Ukrainian friends have had to endure for much longer, in any case, I can't help but wince when I hear some in Australia calling for a return to reliable coal as the answer to our energy needs. In the lead up to that market suspension, we had as much as 4.6 gigawatts of unplanned coal outages, a level probably unmatched in our market's history. So high coal prices and reduced coal generation capacity was a bad combination. That experience reinforced my conviction that we had to reduce our dependence on aging coal-fired power plants. They have a typical retirement age of just 4 years, and the present average age for Australian coal-fired power plants is 38 years. back in that June quarter of 2022, fossil fuel plants, which are mostly coal, supplied about 68% of the electricity in the national energy market. The national energy market, by the way, covered the eastern states, or about 80% of Australia's population. I'm pleased to say that renewable share jumped at that time from 32% to a bit over 3 years ago to almost 43% in the September quarter. Remember too that as an island nation, we don't have the luxury that some European nations have of tapping into a neighbor's high renewable or nuclear supplies. New Zealand gets most of its electricity from hydro, geothermal, or renewable sources. But you might have noticed that it would need a long cable to span what we call the ditch and others call the Tasman Sea. For the first time in our national electricity. And last month, renewables eclipsed coal and gas for the first time, supplying effectively half of our total demand. During the spring and autumn periods, when it's often windy and sunny in Australia, it's not uncommon to see renewables exceeding 75%. One state in our nation hit a 150% total capacity of renewables or more. So it's regularly charging batteries or exporting that electricity to its neighbors. If we can resolve more of the curtailment issues when the grid struggles to carry all the solar and wind capacity being generated, we should expect renewables advance to quicken even further. So just to bookend this issue on power prices, you'll remember a few minutes ago, I noted how wholesale prices had soared in the quarter after Russia's attack on Ukraine began to an average of $264 per megawatt hour in my country's currency. In the 3 months to the end of September this year, those spot prices had sunk to 2/3, with an average price dipping to $87 per megawatt hour. That was a drop of more than a quarter, or 27%, from the same quarter the year before, and a full 38% dive from the June quarter in 2025. That retreat in power prices was absolutely welcomed. The whole component is about 1/3 of the electricity bill most consumers pay. Distribution and retailing costs make up the bulk of the remainder. But the price drop, even as underlying electricity demand in the NEM increased, rising 3.2% from a year ago. And gas prices have remained high compared to the pre-2022 levels, with the average East Coast gas price more than 25% higher than for the March quarter 2022. So that's Aussie $12.62 per gigajoule versus $9.93 per gigajoule. So how did this price decline come about, and how can it be sustained? One factor was the 11% drop in gas-fired power generation versus just a year earlier. The scale of the retreat contrasted neatly with an 11% rise in rooftop solar generation. More than a third of Australian homes boast solar PV on their roofs, and the average output regularly breaks quarterly records, as it just did in the July to September quarter that we've just seen, according to the Australian Energy Market Operator. Wind energy in Australia chimed in too. Output from wind farms was about 1/6 higher than the year earlier, setting, you guessed it, a record for any quarter. Batteries, meanwhile, have been growing like topsy, as we say in Australia. Think mushrooms, perhaps, popping up everywhere. Battery discharge into the grid jumped 150% on average compared to the September quarter a year ago. Now, although the panel has a primary focus on the development of hydrogen economies and the securing of critical mineral supply chains, but I hope you can take a few pointers from this tour of Australia's energy landscape. For our economies to diminish our dependence on fossil fuels, including the ones not facing trade sanctions, must add more renewable energy. For our economies to foster hydrogen, we're going to need some technological breakthroughs. But the path will be smoother the more that we have access to low-cost renewables backed up by storage. There's a reason no developed country ordered a single new coal-fired steam turbine in 2024, after all. And for our economies to decarbonize so that we give the Paris Agreement a chance of success, we're going to need to add renewables and do so fast. It's certainly quicker than trying to build new nuclear energy, whether modular or more traditional kit. So in summary, when we ramp up renewables, the critical minerals Ukraine holds, and Australia too, will be in ever greater demand. Not everybody here is Ukrainian or Australian, I think, but you're all welcome to this road as well. The energy transition, after all, doesn't just require a society-wide approach. We really are all in this together. So I look forward to the day when Ukraine can turn its attention to another crisis. May that day come soon, because I'm confident your nation knows something about seeing off an existential crisis. We could all do with some of that unflinching determination and devotion to another great cause, and that is tackling climate change. So I want to say thank you so much for the privilege of having me as Australian standing with you as Ukrainians. We love you, we admire you, we respect what you're doing to stand up for freedom, for democracy, and against tyranny. And as long as you're doing that, we'll be here standing with you. And in doing so, hopefully tackling that other great challenge of our times, and that is the challenge of climate change, and doing so in a way that will hand the next generation a better planet and a stronger and more prosperous future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Keen, for an incredibly inspiring speech. And now to welcome our panel here, I would like to invite our panel up to kick off. So starting off with Micah Udavine. Micah, welcome. Thank you very much. And we have Joanna Kay from the Superpower Institute. And Єгор Перелигін. Okay. And Olena Pavlenko. Welcome. It's a great honor for you to join us here for our panel. So I think we can kick off here, and we have also joining us. We have Mr. John Grimes. Okay, welcome everybody. And Micah, how about kick us off here?
So first, thank you all for the invitation to speak here. Wait, I'm gonna take off my headphones because this sounds very weird. Hello, you can still hear me, right? Better. Thank you, Mettью, for the inspiring speech you gave to kick us off and to set the stage. I'm Mike Witteveen. I'm a senior director. Systemic is a company that's driving system change for a better future, and we do that across energy, nature, materials, and finance. working with ambitious corporations and philanthropists to really create a better future for all. So that we're doing. Normally, I'm from the energy platform, work on energy transition topics. But one of the more unusual and one of the programs that's closest to our heart is the work that we've done in the last 3 years. I would expect to continue for Ukraine. We've been working on creating blueprints for the green recovery of Ukraine's industrial sector together with our partners at the McKinsey Kiev office. We've been working closely with the government of Ukraine that has supported us throughout. We are working with the private sector, both in Ukraine and beyond the financial sector, governments in the EU and other regions, to really see how can we create these green reconstruction of Ukraine's industry, that a green recovery for Ukraine could bring decarbonization, but also integration into European and global supply chains, providing those with strong resilience. The topics that we discussed today are critical raw materials and energy, and those topics are important for that mission, because in both areas, Ukraine has large natural endowments, making sure that it has a great potential as becoming a strategic partner to the European Union and the rest of the free world. And we also see that there's interest from financial institutions and private parties to invest and drive forward these projects within Ukraine. But interest is not enough to create investments in projects. What we are seeing is that to get investments in Ukraine going, especially for these larger scale projects, it's very often the case that there's limits to what finance can do, commercial, but also conventional finance. If you break down the whole spectrum of investments in Ukraine's industrial sector, in energy and CRM, they're the small to medium-sized projects with a relatively I'm saying, but lower risk. And there's a larger project that have an inherently higher risk. And these smaller, medium-sized projects are the ones that we see already happening today. Maybe not as much as we want, but we see that there's medium scale solar and wind happening, biogas, biofuel. All of that is currently being invested in Ukraine. If you ever look at the more risky, but also more larger scale investments, such as in CRM, but also in hydrogen, in large scale renewable generation, those are the projects where, in all transparency, we don't expect that these large investment will happen before the war is over. But there's a lot that can already be done while the war is ongoing. And that's a message. If there's one thing you take away, this is the one. There is something in the project development, there's this stage that is called project preparation. And project preparation is the engineering, it's a site selection, it's the finding of partners, it's structuring the vehicle, many things that have to be done before the final investment decision can take place and the large sums can flow. However, this project preparation can take years. And starting that up now is the single thing that would create a pipeline of bankable projects in Ukraine that's ready to invest in once the war is over. I'm not sure how long I can talk, but there's one thing I would like to say on that one. So what we need for that, especially in these earlier stages, it's a mix of concessional finance, war insurance, skilled born insurance, and other financing coming together to create those the early investments for these longer term project preparation projects that is so needed to make sure that once the war is over, there's no delay in taking FIDs and building and rebuilding Ukraine that is with a future-proof and strong economy and industry.
Micah, thank you very much. Great to hear your commentary, and thank you so much. So we're going to turn it over to Єгор Перелигін, who is joining us online. Mr. Pereligін, welcome to the Ukraine COP30 pavilion here. Mr. Perelighin joins us from the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Natural Resources in Ukraine, and he was appointed the 5th Deputy Minister to Ms. Gornichuk on April 15th. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to hearing.
Thank you very much. The pleasure to be here. I hope the connection is fine and you can hear me all right. Well, right now I'm already part of the Ministry of Economy of Ukraine, so we have had a lot of changes in the last couple of months. Let me start with the with kind of a follow-up to what Honorable Minister Keen has said and to the highlights that Mike has concentrated on. First of all, I would like to say that we are living in a very, very different time than all of our predecessors have ever lived in. We are basically living through a new technological paradigm and a new technological change. This technological change is basically shaping every single geopolitical and every single macroeconomic aspect and direction that we can imagine. The interesting thing is that we are living once again, second time in the history of the world, in an basically in an age of electricity, just in a different kind of manner. So basically, the situation is as follows. There are two key sectors, the energy sector and the raw materials or the extractive sector, which are the two critical pillars of shaping what is going to come to tomorrow. Where are we gonna reach this new level, this new era, this new framework that we will be in? The situation is very, very interesting. First of all, I would like to say that Ukraine indeed sits in a very important strategic and historic moment. First of all, it sits strategically in a geographic aspect. Second of all, it's well endowed in regards to its natural basically resources base and reserves and resources. And thirdly, it's very much at the right moment, at the right time in history in terms of being a potential partner, a potential platform for both the European Union, the world, the United States, Canada, and the Western civilized world. Why? Look at the situation very simply. We're facing two big predicaments. The first big predicament that we are facing is the fact that there is a big problem with the midstream stage of value chains in the world. It's not only a question of upstream, of extracting the actual raw materials. One of the biggest problems is the exceptionally concentrated in geographic terms, midstream. Look at it through this kind of prism. First of all, if you take your top 20 most important minerals, strategic and critical by country, minerals and metals like lithium, indium, germanium, antimony, vanadium, tantalum, tungsten, nickel, chromium, zirconium, and others, you will find that in 20 main ones, 19, there is one country that absolutely dominates the space for midstream refining. And only basically one mineral to metal is dominated by another country. So basically 19 out of 20 most important strategic minerals and metals are dominated in refining terms by one country. We're all reliant on one country. In minerals like graphite, the situation is even worse because it's not only about domination, it's pretty much a virtual monopoly of refining and producing spheric graphite and anodes for lithium batteries. That's number one problem. Number two problem is that if we take strategic industries like the aerospace industry and the defense industry, we would find that the 6 core minerals and metals, the situation is just like that. All of the 6 are dominated by one country. So basically, that's one side. Another side is the actual electricity and the actual energy supply grid. First of all, we have to understand that we are living in an era where price of electricity and basically supply of electricity will be the key core factor of basically having the capability to grow, having the capability to have a meaningful economic model, and having the capability to having a feasible model for developing any meaningful industrial site or production capacity. Because electricity is one of your core economic inputs in your production. So basically, cheap, reliable, clean energy, and especially electricity, is one of the biggest areas of concern. But when we think about electricity, we think often about generation. And according to the international, for example, International Energy Agency, their recent report, they have said that, okay, investments, capital expenditures in energy generation has increased to $1 trillion per year. Okay, that's a very good sign. So everybody is understanding that we need more energy, especially from new sources. But nobody sees the other problem. The other problem is, once again, the middle ground, just like the midstream in mining and natural resources, the grid and the distribution. The biggest bottleneck in electricity will be the grid and the distribution systems, because your investment capexes are lagging. And that's one of the key problems. So in light of today, and in light of today's discussion, it's not only about a meaningful system of developing projects, of extracting or generating the inputs that we need. It's about actually being able to either to refine the raw inputs and actually produce something meaningful in a constructive, economically feasible way. And on the other side, it's actually transporting the energy and distributing it and getting it to the homes, to the facilities, to the end users that you need. So we are in this major predicament. And Ukraine, as a country with some of the biggest resources in uranium, in titanium, in zirconium, in graphite. For example, Ukraine is the #1 country in titanium reserves and uranium reserves and in graphite reserves in Europe. Why don't we make Ukraine into a hub for these critical minerals for the European backbone, for example? That's logical. That's the logical step to have a cluster-based approach. Why? Because we understand that the transition that we are in and the movement to clean energies will dictate these needs. Look at the situation with internal combustion engines versus electric vehicles. The electric vehicles need from 4 to 6 times more critical minerals than any internal combustion engine vehicle. That's the predicament of today, once again. That means we need to secure more inputs for our transition, for our clean transition. Because without our clean transition, we cannot get anywhere. And final thesis point that I would like to make. While we are at it, transitioning in energy, transitioning in the critical minerals mix that we are at, we do not forget, and we cannot forget about the tailings management, about the mining waste that is left over from the refining and the mining activities. The interesting part is that the nature of most critical minerals production holds a very significant amount of elements and byproducts that can be extracted from the waste and basically turned into a circular economy. So once again, Ukraine, 70% of all waste in Ukraine, from the historical aspect, is either metallurgical or mining waste. This is a golden opportunity where you do not need to mine for new projects. You can go into the tailings and we can do modular extraction for actually securing a number of very important byproducts while solving the environmental issue and basically building an example of a properly working circular economy in the upstream and the midstream segments of any value chain in Ukraine, for Europe, for USA, for Australia, and for the whole of the Western civilized world. So thank you very much. These are some of my notes, some of my observations. I hope they have been useful. I'm I'm very happy to participate in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perelighin. Thank you. It's great to hear your remarks on Ukraine's critical role in the transition. It's been a great honor to be in your country, and thank you very much for joining us here. So with that, we have Miss Joanna Kay joining us, and she is going, so welcome, Miss Kay.
Thank you so very much. I'm a late entrant to the panel discussion, so I'm going to keep it quite high level and at the macro level when I think about what we're talking about, which is kind of critical minerals, supply chains, but certainly energy security and national security. So just to give you a bit of a background, I'm from the Superpower Institute. I actually had the pleasure of working with Mr. Grimes previously. We're ex-colleagues, which is lovely to share a panel with you today, John. I'm sure John will talk about the Australian opportunity in detail, but just to give you a bit of an overview of the work that we do at TSI, we're an economic and policy institute focused on what our economy will look like in a post-carbon world. So we're really thinking about the climate opportunity as an economic. I think that plays into this conversation when we consider what the future of Ukraine could potentially look like with all of those critical minerals endowments as well. Micah, to your point as well, I think the comment you made about making action now while we're in a state of current political tensions is really, really important. And one of the things that I think it'd be very valuable is actually understanding where those reserves are, how we can expedite their extraction, and also do it in a trust and reasonable, a fair and just way as well. So that's very, very important. Just for a bit of context on some of our work that we've done in Australia, we recognize that actually some of our strategic and critical minerals will actually and I see that opportunity for Ukraine as well to be able to do something similar, particularly for the partnering countries as well. I just wanted to take a minute to kind of reflect. I think I was actually based in India when the invasion of Ukraine originally happened, and it was interesting to see, much to Matt Keen's comments earlier, the global effect that had on energy prices, energy supply, and disruption. I remember it was a particularly cold European winter as well during that time. So it has certainly affected all of us globally in regards to energy and that transition. And I'm certainly keen to support and see how we can take this a little bit further. But I think, John, you'll probably have some more detailed comments to make on Ukraine and the Australian parallel.
Agriculture, agroecology.
Joanna, thank you for the great perspective on
that. Important.
From the
main discussion around understand agroecology not only as a practice or a way to
joining us. Mr. Grimes, welcome. We have John Grimes joining us. So thank you very much for joining our panel here.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure for me to make some closing remarks and to sum up some of the things that we've heard on the panel today. Joanna, fantastic to see you. Thank you. And to all of my colleagues. This climate is about the world being in one system, one biosphere, one climate together. What the tragedy of Ukraine tells us is that we also are connected, one economy and one people together. And I think you get a bit of a sense of the outpouring of emotion that you heard from Matt Keen, from Joanna, from Micah and others. But in Australia in particular, our hearts, our thoughts are with Ukraine. We're a long way away. So we don't have many opportunities to express our heartfelt solidarity with the people of Ukraine. The rare occasions when we are geographically together to give you that strong expression of support. But you can guarantee that the entirety of the Australian nation stands behind us when we say that we are one with Ukraine. It seems to me today that there are two massive opportunities for the Ukrainian energy system. The first is distributed renewable resources. We should harness globally a wartime effort to deploy rooftop solar and energy storage right across Ukraine. It is networked innovation, and we see there is nobody better at innovating than the Ukrainian people to actually deploy at scale. In Australia, we've deployed more than 4 million solar rooftops. We can deploy a solar system in less than 1 week. I learned, Joanna's an expert on India. I learned this week that in India, there are companies that are guaranteeing 2-hour delivery time of rooftop solar. Let's get 2-hour delivery time of rooftop solar in the entirety of Ukraine. How do we tap into that solar production at the point where it's actually needed and used? In Australia, we've innovated with a new solar battery program. And this program has delivered more than 120,000 solar batteries since the 1st of July, more than 2 gigawatt hours of storage capacity. Imagine if we can turn every rooftop in Ukraine, and all you need is a man, a screwdriver, a ladder, some basic training, and we can provide energy resilience in Ukraine. Hard to target, quick to fix. You know, that's what we need, the resilience in the energy system. So as part of my role, I work very integrated in the Global Solar Council. I would like to take this back to our friends at the Global Solar Council to say, let's make this a unity mission of the solar industry around the world. We are starting to call for a new target, a 300 million solar rooftop target by 2030. Let's make Ukraine a centerpiece of that target. Let's demonstrate. When you attack Ukraine, you attack the world. When you attack Ukraine, you attack the global economy. We heard from Mettью Keen that that attack by Russia is an attack on every consumer in Australia. The energy spiked not just in Australia, but in every jurisdiction around the world. And so we must mobilize urgently to give Ukraine the resilience and support that you need today. Second, we heard of the great opportunity that comes post-conflict when we prevail against that tyranny. So that the opportunity to do the planning, Mike, I think was so insightful from you, very important. I also saw an amazing statistic when I was researching for this panel. Did you know that Ukraine has enough wind resources to power the entire European economy 6 times over? Fantastic wind. So think about an energy system in the future that is large-scale wind combined with solar, because you get more in summer but much less in winter. So we need to make account of the seasonal variation. So let's respond today. Let's provide resilience today. Let's provide power today. Let's mobilize the world today. But let's also plan for the energy system of the future. To conclude, we are with you. As Matt says, we love you. You will prevail. You must prevail, just as we must prevail as one humanity in the fight against climate change. And so an absolute privilege to present today. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. Thank you for those comments, and we appreciate Australia standing with Ukraine here. So some great commentary from the panel here. We're going to jump into some Q&A. So we're going to kick it off with Micah here. And Micah, we're going to talk about hydrogen development during the war. So Micah, you represent Systemique, and I understand you have been working on both clean energy and CRM topics. From your experience, what can be done to support the development of these sectors while the war is ongoing, and what are the practical actions we can take?
Thank you very much. And thank you for that question. I think it's indeed, while the war is ongoing, I think is an important one, because as I said earlier, it's so important to act now to make sure that when the war is over, or to already provide resilience now and provide investment now and progress and strengthen Ukraine economy today, but also to make sure that after the war is over, larger investments can be made faster. There's no delay. However, what I want to add, like what can practically be done, we already talked about the financial sector. I also want to talk about the public sector within the and about the private sector. Within the energy space, so the hydrogen, we have convened a group of 12 companies that have signed an MOU last year to together develop a hydrogen export corridor or an energy export corridor. And that corridor has gotten the interest of the European Union as a core mechanism and a core corridor, as we say, to bring that immense and low cost renewable capacity to the center of the EU, who does not have the benefit of that space, those high capacity factors in wind and solar. So I think that is one of the core things we are looking into, and it's interest from the European Union, as it should, in my opinion. Then again, this is a longer time process that will, where we are trying to get the feasibility studies done so that when the war is over, the investments can flow. For the CRM sector, there's other things that need to be going. And I know Єгор can talk much more about it than I can. But there are these partnerships with, for example, IFIs that can help to unlock the existing resource database from Ukraine to make it open and accessible and make it clear what is available so it can more easily be developed. And of course, the partnerships with that are necessary with private parties to create those offtake and reliable offtake that is also needed to fast track the investments in those projects. So those are the practical things that should be done now, and that also we are working on together with the Ukraine government at the moment and our other partners.
Can I just ask a follow-up question? With the hydrogen corridors, what sectors are you hoping to go into for the hydrogen? What capacity will it be shipped?
So so there's a hydrogen corridor, and in parallel, we're also looking at just an energy, so power corridor. The sectors will be those, for example, in Bavaria, so the south of Germany, there's and all the countries in between. There's a significant steel sector there, but there's also that can be supplied either directly with HBI from Ukraine, or the hydrogen can be used there. There's also other offtake centers. There's hydrogen valleys being built, with their hydrogen demand developing throughout Central Europe. And I think hydrogen is always a difficult topic because we don't know if and when the demand will go. From our calculations, Ukraine is one of the most lowest cost hydrogen supply in Europe. So I think that's already a position, and it would provide that, especially in a form when it's used already in Ukraine to produce HBI, so hot briquetted iron, that's iron made with hydrogen. It would be competitive within, well, the majority of Eastern Europe. So I think Eastern and a share of Central Europe too. So that's an enormous market. So I think that's that, and I think also exporting the hydrogen itself will have another benefit. So there is, that's what we're looking into. But in parallel, we're also looking at a power export corridor, because we see that the power that could be generated in Ukraine, for example, would be very uncoupled with power generated on the west of Europe. And that balancing could provide a very important piece of resilience for the power sector in Europe.
And no doubt using the hydrogen to firm that power as well before you kind of ship it across as well.
Exactly.
Thank you, Micah. And Micah, a few more points on that. So what regulatory and transit agreements between Ukraine and the EU are required to ensure reliable, competitive, and large-scale export of low-carbon hydrogen via the repurposed gas transmission network?
That's a very good question. I don't have them on the top of my head, I have to say. But there are things like certification of hydrogen that you could think of. What else? Well, in the meantime, what we want to do now is make sure that the hydrogen project within Ukraine are on the critical project list of the European Union, because that would ease investments in those. Similar to the corridor itself, there's already a large natural gas export grid from Ukraine, originally, of course, from Russian gas through Ukraine to Europe, but refurbishing that and retrofitting that to for other fuels, we think is a way to progress that.
Wonderful, thank you. And Joanna, on financing the value chain, what innovative financial instruments and risk mitigation tools can MDBs and DFIs provide for hydrogen projects to reduce political, regulatory, and offtake risks that are particularly high in post-conflict countries?
Thoroughly enjoying the hydrogen conversation, as that was my previous role. But, I think, you know, it's really about securing investment and sending a very strong signal to market. And you talked about it earlier as well. How do you crowd in public investment, private investment, and actually give that security to the market to say that you can invest in Ukraine, you can build these projects. And that comes from a bit of, I think, global political will, and I think backing as well. And it was what, 4 months ago, the Critical Minerals Compact was signed with the United States. That's a really strong signal. And we see the European leaders certainly pushing forward and standing beside Ukraine, another very strong signal for industry. From our perspective at the Superpower Institute, we're very firm on getting a price on carbon, and Europe already does that. The introduction of the carbon market border adjustment will be happening soon, I believe 2027. Yep, 2026, 27 will be integrated. And we certainly think that is a way forward to be able to actually help with those financial market incentives as well. One of the things that we've looked at, particularly in Australia and in our reporting, is how do we create production tax credits or incentives that also match with existing production tax credits around hydrogen as well. So what are the incentives or government mechanisms that we can do to actually offset perhaps a price on carbon, or that green premium that we always talk about as well. The second part of that is perhaps CAPEX funding, and perhaps your international partners, particularly those with deep pockets, should come forward and support with some CAPEX funding to get those projects up and running, and certainly do the front end engineering design that you're so heavily talking about as well.
Maybe to add to that, I think realizing that Ukraine is currently a country at war, project finance is not available for this project. So this is indeed something that should come, and we expect once the war will be over, Ukraine will have to be reconstructed, and then the money will flow in. But we should be ready for that, and that's exactly that's why preparing is so important now.
Thank you, Jonah. And over to Єгор, if you're still with us. Okay.
Of course.
So, Mr. Perelighin, from your perspective, how can Ukraine attract sufficient domestic and foreign investment and secure international cooperation to finance the redesign, reconstruction, and expansion of hydrogen production and transit infrastructure?
Well, first of all, I think that one of the key core points is to have systems or mechanisms, investment mechanisms that lead by catalytic investments. That's number one. So basically, it's the spread and the buildup of investment funds. The US-Ukraine Investment Reconstruction Fund is a good example of that, which is just starting out in its functioning, in its operational kind of function. Then you have the European Flagship Fund, and we have more mechanisms ahead of us planned as well. So basically, mechanisms like that, they can take minority equity stake in strategic and critically important projects and ventures, and basically lead by example. First of all, that gives security to co-investors. Second of all, it gives the ability, especially if there are financial instruments with guarantees, with project financing, with a long-term kind of capital funding, etc., that gives the ability to bring in those instruments to bring in long-term capital. That's number one. Number two is that you can leverage these equity investments, because if they are 10, 15, 20% of a project, you can have 60, 70, 80% be financed by private investors who will be solidified and basically have the political and the risk-oriented security from having such a partner as a mechanism, as a fund, and basically being willing to invest because you have somebody spearheading and leading by example. That's number two. Number three, which is an essential part of the of the formula of success. Number 3 is we need to get European large-scale off-takers, American large-scale off-takers, Western world large-scale off-takers to sign formula-based long-term contracts with Ukrainian projects that can basically allow for 20-30% of prepayment. One of the key problems of today's development of critical minerals in Ukraine is the fact that prepayment mechanisms are pretty much non-existent due to the war and due to the risks. That is a major problem. So basically, in that sense, by bringing in long-term offtakes, we can help fund certain amount of capexes that are ahead for the project development. And last but not least, let me be absolutely open, clear, frank, objective, is that we are living in a very competitive world where nobody is going to give us any quarter. I'm talking about the Western world and those that basically want to build a free economy, a free democracy, and those who adhere to the Western-oriented moral principles. It's very important to understand that a lot of countries today have the have the tendency to go to shadow banking mechanisms to finance some of their projects and use market distorting mechanisms to play with the prices and with the global prices, to push those operators out of the market that they deem necessary. That is a major problem that becomes a barrier for new entries into the global markets. You know what I'm talking about when you look at such bankruptcies as Swedish Northvolt, who went bankrupt because they could not compete and could not hold their positions against, for example, Chinese electric vehicle and battery manufacturers. So basically, one of the key ideas right now is that we need to rethink the system of how our banking institutions and banking systems, of how our developmental institutions finance these projects. And most importantly, that these projects have to be financed and have to be launched, like Mike has said, on an early stage of project preparation. We have to get these institutional investors to the project preparation stage. That means getting them to help us secure and defend and estimate our resources and reserves, do the mineralogy, the chemistry, do the laboratory works, do the core drilling, and basically help lead these projects onto the market to raise the capital required. And finally, once again, we get back to the electricity component. In order for any project of this magnitude and this sphere to be successful, it requires an effective means of supplying the electrical input into the production cycle. So that is also something that has to be solved. And the only way to do that is through investment funding mechanisms, like I have said, through long-term offtakes, and funny or not, which has seemed to work, price floors. If governments and strategic buyers can step in and provide price floors and guaranteed margins for strategic products that, often these strategic products like gallium, germanium, and, these very, very exotic tellurium, indium, vanadium products and elements, they're not very popular and they're very hard to extract and refine. So you need to give a certain peace of mind to the operators who are brave enough to, venture into these projects. And this falls onto the shoulders of not only investors, private investors. This is a risk that is best shared by investors, developmental institutions, and governments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perelighin. Very, very, very astute comments. And, we can appreciate that Ukraine has done a great deal to align EU environmental standards by adopting the EU taxonomy, the EU green bond standard. And as this applies to hydrogen, what regulatory and certification frameworks do you think Ukraine should develop or adopt to harmonize its hydrogen production, transport, and quality standards with EU Renewable Energy Directive and EU hydrogen strategy?
Let me reframe the scope of the question, if I may, and let me put it into a larger perspective. Ukraine will have to transpose and implement every single EU directive that is out there on its path to the European Union. And Ukraine has shown massive success, I think, in being very rapid in adopting a number of European legislation, norms, acts, directives, every single piece of standard or norm. What I want to say is that I don't claim to be a hydrogen specialist, and I do not want to claim to be a hydrogen specialist. But you have to take something that is very important. With Ukraine, everything really starts at the foundational level of geology and basically assessing and operating on the natural resources level and regulating the movement of natural resources and the resulting products like hydrogen, like electricity, like the energy outputs, etc., etc. One of the key ideas is that Ukraine needs to fully realign itself onto EU standards, like it did with for example, the strategic assessment of the EU CRM Act. So basically, we said, let's not have our selected projects be sent into the EU under the, for example, UNFC framework standards of resource classifications, but let's basically make the change for all of Ukraine and for every single operator to reclassify its resource and reserve base onto the UNFC standard, so that in the future, we can bridge this classification of resources, into JORC, into national instruments, or into CRISCO. So basically, one of the key elements that I can highlight is that Ukraine basically needs to be systemic in a way in its path to applying these regulations, and not wait, or not basically, do not be afraid to make the necessary changes. Of course, while making those changes, the transitional periods need to be, of course, accounted for, and the necessary policies need to be adjusted for. So basically, if I can answer it that way, because as I said, I'm not really a hydrogen specialist.
No, thank you. So, Joanna, maybe back over to you for a few questions here. Okay, so Joanna, in your view, what role do MDBs and DFIs play ensuring adherence to environmental and social safeguards in hydrogen projects to attract private investment and ensure long-term sustainability in post-conflict regions?
A nice light question. Thank you. Look, I think like just to the conversation that's just occurred, when we think about hydrogen standards and aligning them globally, it's critically important to remember that the future is green hydrogen and low emissions hydrogen. And it's great that you will be able to repurpose those gas pipelines. I understand that there are some challenges around that as well, and the percentage of hydrogen that you can pump through those existing gas pipelines taps out at about 20%. So ensuring that 20% of hydrogen that is used in those gas pipelines is in fact green hydrogen will be critically important, and certification and aligning with those standards is very important. I think that when we think about development finance, and we certainly think around the future of Ukraine and what that potentially could look like, I think it's really important that we think about the economies that we want and the industries that we want. There is no point investing in blue hydrogen. There's no point investing in brown hydrogen. The future is in fact green hydrogen. And we should be focused on that, and investment from those development banks should be standing there as well. I think the key part of this is what does the future look like for Ukraine, and what does that time frame look like, I think is a challenging one. And again, to reiterate your point, Micah, it's about being ready and prepared for that. I think one of the things that has really inspired me, particularly with Ukraine over the last few months, is I'm involved in a movement called the Paris Collaborative, which is a program for students aged 12 to 18, predominantly from the global south or areas around the world. We had around 1,500 submissions of students around the world making technology advancements to fix some of the SDGs in their local community. And there was a young woman from Ukraine, she was 16 years old, and she created a medical app that was used for heart disease and prevention of heart disease. And anyway, she was one of our global fellows. So out of 1,500 people, she was in the top 20 globally. And it just reiterated the point that there's a lot of talent in Ukraine. There's a lot of technology opportunities as well. And getting those prepared and ready for what a post-war Ukraine looks like will be incredibly valuable. And if the development banks and the multilateral banks can lean into that and understand that to offset the risk, because there will be inevitably risk as they are conservative forums, I think that'll be great.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you. And maybe just back over to critical minerals for just a little bit. Maybe John, over to you for how Ukraine collaborate with global supply chain actors and technology developers to establish sustainable extraction, processing, and export standards for lithium, titanium, and graphite in line with international standards.
Well, a little bit like Ukraine, Australia has the advantage of having the periodic table of minerals under our feet. And so Australia actually has one of the most highly efficient, safe, clean mining industries in the world. And I think that a particular focus that we could have is really coming in to provide that technical expertise, to really figure out how do we fast track Ukrainian resource extraction and exploitation to meet world's best practice. And I think that's something that our government and our industry should really look to commit to doing, because collectively we face a global pressure when it comes to access to critical minerals, to rare earths and others. I think the point about having a global floor price is really interesting to actually underpin that activity. And these are strategic decisions that we collectively need to make, because as I said before, we're all in this together. So another practical outcome from this discussion might be to kind of advance that discussion also as we move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. And back over to Igor for a question on security and sovereignty as it relates to.
Yes.
So, Mr. Perelligin, how can, in your view, how can we leverage Ukraine's substantial critical mineral reserves, such as lithium, titanium, and graphite, to reduce dependency on foreign supply chains and enhance strategic autonomy in the global energy transition?
Well, actually, it's it's a simple and a complex task at the same time. One of the key positive points is that Ukraine is a rich country in terms of its natural base diversification. It's also a country with a quite well-developed logistical network and, ironically enough, a very, very strong electrical grid, which is a testament to the resilience of the Ukrainian engineering. What I would like to say is that you probably might have heard, but the backbone originally of the Soviet titanium industry, so the aerospace industry, the aircraft manufacturing industry, and the backbone of the Soviet uranium and nuclear industry was actually Ukraine. Ukraine had a very, very significant school of titanium engineers. And Ukraine is actually one of the only countries in the world that had the full cycle of what we call the crawl cycle. So basically the processing of titanium ores into titanium metal, which is essential for producing aircrafts, for producing fuselages, missiles, for producing actually green energy technologies. Because if you're building desalination plants, or if you're building direct lithium extraction plants for the green economy, you will need titanium parts, because titanium is a metal that can adapt itself and that can operate under very, very difficult and tough environments. So, considering the fact that Ukraine has the resource base, has a high quality resource base, and I would like to highlight the fact that right now, the quality of ores and the quality of mines has declined over the last 30 to 40 years. It is a fact. If you look at the quality of ores, of copper, of nickel, of manganese, of zinc, of titanium, it has declined over the last 30, 40 years. And the more we mine, the more we will have to mine and process low grade and low quality ores. In that regard, Ukraine, with its rich uranium fields, with its rich titanium deposits, can make a power play in that regard. That's number one. Number two is the fact that a lot of Ukraine's titanium deposits, uranium deposits, and lithium deposits, and other critical minerals, they come with a very serious amount of byproducts. Ukraine, a country that has extracted and refined and processed titanium ores, is also known and has also been known to process at the same locations, extract and process zirconium, hafnium, scandium, vanadium, and other critical metals, which we often call rare metals, that are needed for the energy transition. That's the second part, which is crucially important, is that the power play is not only in the quality of the ores, which are very, very high class, is also the fact that there is a mix of interesting rare metals that can be extracted as byproducts. And thirdly, which is essentially an element and a component to this power play strategy, is the fact that Ukrainian, for example, if we are taking titanium, is actually ideally oriented towards the Western markets and the Western processing standards. So basically leverage the quality, leverage the certification, leverage the existing engineering school, which is existing. Ukraine actually had a dedicated Institute of Titanium for many, many dozens of years, and which was actually responsible for building a lot of mining, processing assets and objects across the world. So leverage the engineering school. The only key problem right now is cost of capital, access to project finance, and the needs for market making. But we believe that the international investment fund mechanisms that we are currently setting up and implementing, they will basically solve the two critical spheres of this problem. They will solve the problem for capital, access to capital, because they will be spearheading and be catalytic. And number two, they will de-risk some of these projects. So basically, they will open up the way for private operators. Of course, the only question that we cannot solve at the moment is the war. So basically, this is something that we have to manage. As Mike and as everybody has said, this is something that we need to stick and remain at the preparatory stage and do our homework and launch what we can launch. By the way, modular extraction from tailings is not something that we have to wait for. These are projects that we can actually build up and make function already right now. So basically, it's not all about waiting, we can do more small grain oriented specific projects already. So in that regard, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perelligin. It sounds like there's a great deal that we can learn from Ukraine's expertise in this area, a great deal of resources, and I think we can learn a tremendous amount from Ukrainian strength, courage, and bravery. And so thank you very much for your perspective. So I think we should turn it over to Mr. Grimes for some key takeaways and
well, what I heard, a couple of key takeaways. Don't wait. There is substantive work we can do now. For the things we can't do now, let's use the time and multitask so that we're ready when we can act. Let's also focus on the immediate term. Let's also strategically place Ukraine in terms of the mechanisms to allow the exploitation of the opportunity. And so I think that Ukraine has a tremendously bright future. I think that, but we have to be clear-eyed and understand that we have to put our shoulder to the wheel. This is not something that Ukraine can face on its own. The whole world has to pour in support. So we need to be activating in that spirit, actually resources from around the world, think creatively about how we can value add and really put Ukraine at the center of Europe's energy future, you know, when, thank God, this war comes to an end.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes. And yes, Australia stands with Ukraine, and I think the world stands with Ukraine here. And they have shown tremendous leadership in the energy transition and tremendous innovation during these times. So we appreciate the perspective from our panel here, and thank you very much. And we admire, we love Ukraine, and we thank Ukraine for their leadership in critical minerals.